What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Thank you for clicking onto this reaction. I hope you're looking forward to it just as much as I am. If you haven't already, head over to the content creators page. That link is in the description box down below. If you haven't already and you're enjoying our content, you know what you need to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but we're going to jump straight into this one. Okay, Battle of Mohacs 1526. How the Ottomans broke the Hungarian Kingdom. Let's go.
The Kingdom of Hungary had long opposed Ottoman expansion in the Balkan Peninsula and northwards into the Carpathian Basin. King Matthias Corvinus and his Black Army had intervened in several conflicts against the Turks, but Hungarian royal power had declined after his death in 1490 due to mismanagement under his successor, King Vladislav II. Internal conflict and a peasant uprising further weakened the Hungarian crown. Under threat from further Ottoman expansion, Vladislav's son, King Louis II, forged an alliance with the Austrian Habsburgs through his marriage to Mary of Habsburg.
Is this around the same sort of era as Vlad the Impaler? Around the same sort of time?
In 1522. The Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, saw this as a challenge to his control of the Balkans and endeavored to break it through any means possible. Preparations were made, and the Ottoman army gathered.
Okay.
We can examine a historical representation of the Battle of Mohacs in this painting, which shows some of the weapons and strategies that were used, such as the Ottoman cavalry charge, their artillery batteries, or the white-robed Suleiman himself, mounted on a horse as he commands his troops.
It's a really nice painting.
Representations like this don't just teach us about history, they can help us improve our own futures, because the right art can hold.
I got lost into an ad. Me.
Suleiman's mighty army, consisting of 50,000 to 100,000 men and 300 cannons, departed Constantinople in April 1526. Despite heavy rain slowing their progress, the army reached the Sava in late June. To the surprise of the Sultan, no hostile army was present to oppose their crossing. The Ottoman vanguard was led by Ibrahim Pasha, who reached the key fortress of Petrovaradin by the middle of July. The town was besieged and resisted for 2 weeks before it eventually fell on the 28th of July.
I mean, with no support, what do you expect to happen?
The strong point of Uylak was also captured on August the 8th, securing Turkish control of the Danube. The path was now open for Suleiman's army to advance onto the vulnerable Hungarian plain. Up to this point, the bulk of his host had remained near Belgrade, but now they reunited with Ibrahim's vanguard and began the march towards Buda. Hungarian mobilization began only on June 23rd, as the peasant population was needed to gather the summer harvest before the campaigning season could begin in earnest.
Oh, what a late delay to actually building up a force.
The armed force that gathered around Tolna was much smaller than the army of Suleiman, numbering between 25,000 and 30,000 men and 80 cannons. Furthermore, personal animosities once again poisoned the atmosphere of the camp. Louis initially sent Palatine Stephen Bathory as his general, but many nobles demanded that the king lead the army in person, refusing to serve under the command of Bathory. In the meantime, the small force of Hungarian command.
So, I'm looking forward to finding out if the king goes.
Commander and Archbishop Pai Tamori was engaging raiding parties around Karas Severin and scored several minor successes. Nonetheless, Tamori lacked the men to slow the advance of Suleiman and began to withdraw from the border. King Louis II, complying with the requests of his nobles, arrived to command the royal army in late August. A few weeks later, the king and his advisors decided to move their camp to the plains of Mohacs and sent orders to Tamori to join them there.
Setting up the scene.
Suleiman soon received intelligence that the Hungarian king had joined the army and its location.
Makes sense, like.
11 days after the fall of Uylak, the Ottoman armies crossed the Drava and converged towards the Hungarian forces. It is difficult to know the accuracy of Hungarian intelligence, particularly regarding the size of the Ottoman army. The king and his nobles held several war councils, eventually deciding to give battle. In hindsight, this could be interpreted as a mistake, since the Hungarians were outnumbered at least 2-1 against an opponent that had superior artillery and the fearsome Janissaries, a professional corps of infantry armed and trained in modern firearm techniques.
So it seems like they're really it's outweighed on the other side. I mean, the better trained troops, superior artillery, and numerical advantage. Those are three big things to have on your side. Like, massive.
The decision to give battle was even more unusual given the proximity of other friendly forces to Louis. The army of the voivode of Transylvania, John Zapolya, was camped just to the east at Szeged. Zapolya had between 10 and 15,000 soldiers under his command, and was a seasoned commander, unlike much of the Hungarian nobility. Another force composed of Czech soldiers and German mercenaries was also camped at Győr, to the north near Buda. According to Hungarian chroniclers, this army was much better equipped than King Louis's host.
Okay.
Finally, the force of the governor of Croatia and Slavonia, numbering near 6,000 men, was also marching towards Mohacs from the west to join the main Hungarian force. The safest option would have been to retreat from Mohacs and unite with these other armies.
Oh, I see. They were all sort of conveying onto Louis' spot, but he was so far ahead that they weren't going to be able to catch him in time.
Especially since the Transylvanian and Croatian troops were within marching distance of the king's army. This was the course of action that Suleiman expected. A brilliant commander himself, when he crossed the Drava unopposed, he believed that the decisive battle would take place before the Hungarian capital.
Okay.
Had Louis withdrawn towards Buda, there was a good chance that all four Hungarian armies would have united in time to confront the Ottomans, since the Czech and German mercenaries were much closer to the city than the main Hungarian army. Combined, the Hungarian detachments would have created a force of 50,000 men. While this was still a smaller army than the Ottoman host, it would have made a much more formidable force than the one Louis II had at his disposal. Historians have given several explanations for the actions of the king and his commanders, and why they took the risk of engaging the superior Ottoman army without their full strength. Some believe that the mutual jealousies of the commanders blinded them, each eager to prove their martial prowess. Much of the Hungarian nobility resided in the northern sections of the Hungarian plain, far from the militarized border with the Turks, and hence lacked military experience.
I see, so they wanted to start making a name for themselves, and actually getting that sort of reputation.
Simultaneously, this lack of experience made the Hungarian leadership overconfident in the ability of their army to drive back Suleiman's invasion. Furthermore, the Ottoman army was highly mobile, and Louis's commanders believed that the Turkish cavalry would harass their retreat. Extracting the infantry, which comprised around 50% of the army, and their 85 guns, would have proven particularly arduous.
See, I didn't actually think about that, and that is something to take on board. Whether it would have changed my opinion or my decision, I'm still unsure about. I would have definitely had to look at what possible things I could have done to make that not as much of a risk, or if we do that, how to reduce the casualties or the effects of that. But that is something that I didn't sort of think about.
It was also likely that the Hungarians expected that the southern fortresses on the Danube would more effectively hinder Ottoman progress, delaying them for longer and giving the Croatian and Transylvanian forces time to join the main camp. Finally, it could be argued that there would not have been sufficient supplies to feed the united armies, as the last time a large royal army was assembled in September 1521, numbering around 60,000 men, the campaign to retake Belgrade had to be called off when sickness broke out in the camp.
And again, that actually makes a lot more sense, something I didn't consider. Just earlier on in the video, they said that they had to wait for the harvest because obviously they were all worried about the army being starved. So all depending on how good that harvest was, depending on how much of their army they would be able to feed and also supply. So that point there, I think, is more valid than anything else so far. But again, would it have changed my decision? I don't know, but it's something I didn't think about, and I like the fact that it was pointed out.
Some historians believe that a lack of supplies, exacerbated by the unsanitary conditions of the camp, led to an outbreak of sickness that convinced the nobles to disband the army.
But there you go, they already had a issue with sickness, so that's another thing to take on board as well.
As a young man of 20 with no military experience, King Louis was heavily reliant on his nobles for advice. Consequently, he agreed to their decision to face the Ottomans on the plains of Mohacs on August the 29th, risking the fate of his kingdom in one decisive battle.
Oh, what does he do?
The Hungarians had been encamped near Mohacs for 3 weeks, allowing them time to scout the terrain and choose a battleground that suited their smaller numbers. The plains around Mohacs were flat, but narrow enough to constrict the Ottoman deployment, preventing them from forming long battle lines to outflank the Hungarian army.
Okay.
The east side of the plain was dominated by the marshlands of the Danube. At one point, a tributary of the Danube, the Borza, crossed the fields, and the flat ground continued up until the ridge that lay beyond the small village of Fordvar.
Squares, thank you.
The Hungarian army took position in the early morning of August 29th, just south of the Borza, and approximately 2 to 2.5 kilometers away from the ridge.
Once again, trying to use the fact that there's not much area for the Ottomans to outflank them, which is smart when you've got a lower amount of soldiers and warriors.
The army was deployed into 2 lines, each consisting of a right wing, center, and left wing. The right wing of the first line was comprised of 6,000 cavalrymen under the command of Batatieni Ferenc, Duke of Slavonia. The center of the first line had between 10,000 and 12,000 soldiers, mainly infantry and containing large numbers of mercenaries that had been hired with papal money. This group was commanded by Pai Tamori, who had been chosen as the overall leader of the Hungarian
as well. Defending your homeland gives you a lot more
Meanwhile,
motivation.
the left was under Perenye Peter, the Count of Temes, who commanded around 3,000 horsemen. Whilst his wing was weaker than the other, it was protected by the marshlands of the Danube. The second line was much thinner than the first, and the king stood behind the center amongst his bodyguard of heavy cavalry, with light cavalry and levy infantry on either side of him. Historians are unsure where the artillery was deployed, but the most probable answer is in front of the center of the first line, perhaps with some ahead of the central section of the second line.
Is that because they had no elevation behind them, so they had to sort of put it in front of them?
In total, the Hungarian army contained 25,000 to 30,000 men and 85 guns.
The number difference is outrageous.
With a 50 to 50 cavalry to infantry ratio. Suleiman had a much larger army than his Hungarian counterpart, and historians estimate that his army numbered 50,000 to 100,000 men, though the number was likely closer to 50,000. He also heavily outgunned his enemies with 300 cannons to the 85 of King Louis.
But the 300 cannons to 85 cannons are still a big difference.
The Sultan's army was also split into 3 divisions. The vanguard was made up of the provincial troops and conscripts from Rumelia, led by Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha. The center of the Ottoman column consisted of the household troops of the Sultan, the Janissaries and the Sipahi professional cavalry, alongside most of the artillery. The rear guard contained troops from Anatolia, mainly provincial cavalry, and conscripts similar to the Rumelians in the vanguard. It soon became apparent that the Hungarians had deployed too early in the morning, as the Ottomans only started to descend from the ridge around noon, taking around 2 hours for the full Ottoman army to descend.
So the Hungarians have been standing there for hours already, like just wasting energy.
The Rumelians in the vanguard arrived first, and since marching in the August heat had exhausted his troops, the Sultan convened a council and decided to postpone the engagement. Orders were sent out to the troops to immediately start constructing a new camp on the plain below the ridge. Around this time, under the command of Bali Bey, a few thousand Akinjis attempted an outflanking maneuver against the right flank of the Hungarians, to which Tomori replied by sending a detachment of cavalry against them from the second line, deterring them from further aggression.
Nice.
As the first down the ridge, the Rumelians in the vanguard were the only Ottoman troops on the plain for a time.
Did he take initiative and attack here?
The Sultan's household contingents of Janissaries and Sepahis were still descending when the Rumelians began work on the camp, while the Anatolian troops who were marching at the rear of the Ottoman army were still on the heights of the ridge.
Go, right?
When Tomori observed that the Rumelians were building their camp, he took the Hungarian right and charged against them.
Nice.
Realizing that the Ottoman army greatly outnumbered his own, Tomori likely hoped to overwhelm the vanguard with a swift charge, while the rest of the Ottoman army had not.
Inflict as many casualties as you can now, because it's going to affect the numbers later, right? Surely that makes sense.
Yet deployed, and consequently turn against the rest of the Ottoman army and defeat them separately. The charge was initially successful and broke the formation of the unprepared Rumelians. Hungarian cavalry inflicted heavy losses on the Ottoman vanguard, forcing through their front ranks. Tomori was emboldened by this success and sent a messenger to the king requesting an all-out attack.
Go on.
Although sections of the nobility advised the king to postpone the battle, the king responded to this call, but his reaction was slow. By the time the rest of the army started the attack, Tomori's charge was waning, and a significant portion of the Ottoman army managed to reach the battlefield and take up position.
That's the problem.
The momentum of the
he lost the initiative, which is such a shame. Such a shame. The whole force should have gone at that point that the cavalry right wing charged.
The Hungarian right wing was stopped when they came up against the field fortifications that were protecting the artillery of the Rumelian camp. Still, the Hungarian attack continued, and after a short while, the infantry joined the cavalry on the right, attacking the beleaguered Ottoman vanguard. Tomori, however, had been too aggressive. He underestimated the distance between the sections of the Ottoman army, and to the horror of the Hungarians, the full might of Suleiman's force marched onto the plain in battle formation, led by the Sultan himself. The Ottoman Janissaries were particularly threatening, utilizing their well-drilled musket fire to devastating effect. By the time the Hungarian second line and left wing could reinforce the right,
it was too late.
The Sultan's army was deployed, drastically shifting the tide of battle. The most vulnerable part of the Hungarian army, the understrength left wing, was now attacked by the more numerous Anatolian cavalry.
Far too late, and it's not looking good, is it?
Coming under tremendous pressure. The artillery and musket fire of the Ottomans broke the Hungarian attack, and the Hungarian position began to quickly deteriorate. Most of the cavalry from the reserve joined the left wing to hold back the Anatolian advance and prevent them from exposing the Hungarian flank.
Does the reinforcements help?
However, these reinforcements were insufficient and were repelled. Soon, the entire Hungarian cavalry force began to flee northwards in panic, exposing the infantry in the center. The Ottomans pushed their foe towards the Danube.
And even the far left-hand side for me, even those cavalry have left. So it's a complete
Many perished in the treacherous marshes. The Hungarian commander, Pai Tomori, is thought to have fallen whilst attempting to rally his fleeing men.
He tried to rally his men at least. There's not much more you can ask for, is there?
The infantry adopted a square formation and repelled the Ottoman attacks for a while, but they were eventually
encircled. There was no way they were going to be able to survive.
Overwhelmed and cut down or captured. All in all, the Hungarian army suffered devastating losses, with the lowest count giving 4,000 to 6,000 cavalrymen and over 10,000 infantrymen slain. Most Hungarian commanders were also killed during or after the battle. Even King Louis II perished while
The king died in battle himself.
fleeing the field.
Oh, not even in battle. Fleeing.
When his horse threw him into a river, and he drowned under the weight of his heavy armor.
Wasn't even killed by anyone else. Didn't even go out fighting. The man drowned.
Around 2,000 men of the royal army became Ottoman prisoners, who were executed 2 days after the battle on the orders of the Sultan. It is said that Suleiman ordered his army to remain at Mohacs for several days, not believing that the small Hungarian force was all the kingdom could muster.
Again, once again smart, because it wasn't the full force that he could muster.
Eventually, the victorious Ottoman army continued their march towards Buda, capturing and pillaging the abandoned Hungarian capital before returning across the Danube into friendly territory. The Ottomans would definitively conquer the city in 1541. The death of the young king caused a succession crisis in Hungary, and the divided nobility elected 2 kings. The eastern nobles elected John Zapolya, the voivode of Transylvania, as their new king, while Palatine Stephen Bathory and his supporters backed the claims of the Austrian Archduke Ferdinand and elected him as the next ruler of Hungary.
Okay.
Civil war soon erupted between the rival factions, and in the end, the once powerful kingdom was partitioned into 3 parts.
Once again, broken down.
The western and northern sections of the kingdom became Royal Hungary and fell under Habsburg rule. The Ottomans directly annexed the central lands of the kingdom and set up the Pashalik of Buda, while Transylvania seceded from Royal Hungary and became a vassal of the Ottoman sultans. The Battle of Mohacs broke the power of the Hungarian kingdom, the last major obstacle to Turkish domination of the Balkans. The route was open for their advance on Vienna in 1529, heralding centuries of hostility between the Austrian Habsburgs and the Ottoman Empire.
Wow,
If you stayed around this far, thank you for
thoroughly
watching.
enjoyed that video. Mohacs is seen by many Hungarians as the decisive downward turning point in the country's history, a national trauma that persists in the nation's folk memory. To indicate magnitude of bad luck at hand, Hungarians still say war was lost to Monarchs. Under Suleiman, the magnificent rule, the Ottoman Empire reached its zenith. His victory at Monaco broke the Kingdom of Hungary. The ensuing 200 years of near constant warfare between 2 empires, Habsburg and Ottoman, turned Hungary a perpetual battlefield, and its territories were split into 3 parts. Only in the 19th century would Hungary re-establish its former borders under the Habsburg rule. Very interesting. What a great video. I'm loving these suggestions, guys. Thank you very much.